The Derbyshire Peak District was the first part of the United Kingdom to become a national park. That was in 1951. It's situated in Derbyshire, almost in the centre of the country, and it also borders into some of the other surrounding counties. On the southern edge of the Peak District you'll find Ashbourne. This has been a market town since 1257 when it was given its first charter, and it remains a market town today with a market every week. Ashbourne is the starting point of the Tissington Trail, a traffic-free trail for walkers and cyclists which is immensely popular. It leads up through the village of Tissington and up into Dovedale. Tissington is an extremely pretty village and is around 1,000 years old, having been recorded in the Domesday Book of 1086. Tissington Hall is the home of the Fitzherbert family and has been since 1465. The original manor house was replaced by this newer building in 1609. Well dressing is an old established tradition in Derbyshire about which I will say more later. The earliest mention of this seems to have been at Tissington in 1348, probably as a reaction to the Black Death which swept through the country in that year. The tradition was taken up by many other villages in the area. The Church of St Mary dates from the 12th century and much of the original building is still in use. The trail then takes you up through Dovedale, and the River Dove, which is very famous for its trout fishing, makes for a very pleasant 3-mile walk. The village of Castleton is situated between the gritstone plateau of the Dark Peak to the north and the gentler limestone scenery of the White Peak to the south. It's a village that also has roots going back to before the Norman conquest. The castle, which looks down from the hill above, was built by Sir William Peveril. He was a favourite knight of William the Conqueror, although some sources say he was actually William's illegitimate son. He was given enormous tracts of land throughout the country, including Nottingham Castle and the area around it, and down as far as Cambridge and Huntingdon. Castleton lies in the shadow of the mysterious Mam Tor, known as the Shivering Mountain. So called because of the number of landslips that occur on its eastern side. In 1979, the road across Mam Tor was finally closed, as the Highways Department lost the battle against the continuing landslips. Beneath the hills around Castleton are a number of caverns where mining still continues for a semi-precious stone called Blue John. It's the only place in the world where it can be found. It is used for making jewellery and decorative art and homeware. Some of the caves have quite ordinary names. Others are more inventive. It got this name because when the underground waters in the cavern start to drain away, a very loud, flatulent sounding noise arrives. It was always known as this until there was going to be a visit from Queen Victoria, and in order not to upset her sensibilities, they changed the name to the Peak Cavern. However, these days people are not so worried about things like that, and it's reverted to its traditional name of the Devil's Arse. More stunning scenery takes us over to the town of Bakewell. This is the only designated town in the Peak District. Dating back to Anglo-Saxon times and sitting on the River Wye, this five-arched bridge dates to the 13th century, as does the parish church. Bakewell got its first market charter in 1254 in the reign of Henry III, and a market is still held every Monday. The town is famous for two delicacies, each similar but quite different. One is the Bakewell tart, which is a jam tart made with short crust pastry, whilst the other is called the Bakewell pudding. This is said to have originated in this hotel, now the Rutland Arms, when the cook charged with making a Bakewell tart got the ingredients the wrong way round and ended up with something more akin to an egg custard. Ah well. Near Bakewell we have two very different but equally wonderful stately homes. The first of these is Chatsworth. It was built in the 1550s and 60s by this remarkable woman, Bess of Hardwick, the matriarch of the Cavendish dynasty, which still lives in the property today. Her son William was the first Earl of Devonshire, and the line continues unbroken today to today's incumbent, the 12th Duke of Devonshire. Set in acres of glorious parkland, the property boasts amazing staterooms and a huge collection of art, with works by Rembrandt, Van Dyck, Da Vinci and many others. Amongst the many sculptures is this Veiled Vestal Virgin by Raffaele Monti. During her captivity in England, Mary Queen of Scots spent a fair amount of time at Chatsworth. Mary and Bess of Hardwick were both accomplished needlewomen, and together they worked on the Oxborough Hangings, a tapestry which is now owned by the Victoria and Albert Museum. Chatsworth continues to delight thousands of visitors every year. "5 miles down the road you'll find Haddon Hall. On a totally different scale to Chatsworth, it feels much more like a family home, and has indeed been in the same family since the 14th century. At the beginning of the 18th century, the Earl of Rutland, who owned Haddon Hall, was made a duke, and he felt that in keeping with his new position he should move to the bigger premises that he owned in Belvoir Castle. Haddon was thus neglected for almost 200 years, until the 1920s, when the 9th Duke decided that it should be restored, but retaining as much of the Tudor building as possible. The restoration work was done very cleverly and very sympathetically, and it still retains the feel of a family home, even although the Long Gallery is still enormously impressive. A 25-minute drive through the Hope Valley will bring you to a village whose 350-year-old story has got strange echoes of our current situation with pandemic and lockdown. This, of course, is the famous plague village of Eyam. This stone was one of the boundary markers for the quarantine area. People from neighbouring villages would leave food on markers such as these, and the townsfolk of Eyam would pay for them using coins dipped in vinegar as a disinfectant. The plague ran its course for over 14 months. Accounts vary, but it's reckoned that there were between 270 and 370 victims in all. The village is much unchanged since 1665, and many of the victims' cottages are marked with the names of those who died. As the disease spread, the villagers turned for leadership to their rector, the Reverend William Mompesson. He introduced a number of precautions to slow down the spread of the disease, the most important one being the quarantining of the village. Each family buried its own dead in various plots around the town. The only victim buried in the churchyard was Mompesson's own wife, Catherine. This is the burial plot of the Hancock family. Mrs. Hancock survived, but her husband and 6 children all died within a period of 8 days. Moving along through the lovely valley of the River Derwent, we will come eventually to the village of Hathersage, which used to be famous for the manufacture of needles, pins and brass buttons. Today it's another centre for those wishing to walk and explore the area. The grounds around the Church of St Michael are said to contain the grave of Little John, Robin Hood's right-hand man. Kinder Scout is a moorland plateau in the Peak District, most of which stands at around 600 metres, which is 2,000 feet above sea level. It was formed over 200 million years ago on a bed of a vast river delta. Gritstone tors litter the area. Their distinctive shapes make it look a bit like a sculpture park. On the 24th of April 1932, it was the site of a willful mass trespass by hundreds of ramblers, highlighting the lack of access to open country for walkers in England and Wales. This was the beginning of a national movement to access to the countryside. This led to the creation of the UK's national parks and much wider access for ramblers and walkers. Kinder Downfall is the highest waterfall in the Peak District, and when the wind's in the right direction, it appears to be defying gravity. Buxton lies just on the edge of the Peak District, and at 1,000 feet above sea level is the highest town in Britain. It has long been noted as a spa town, and it is known that Mary Queen of Scots was brought here by Bess of Hardwicke in order to take the waters. This is due to a geothermal spring which rises at a constant 28 degrees. It was because of this spring in 1730 the 5th Duke of Devonshire decided to try and develop Buxton as a spa town, and you can see from the architecture that he used Bath as his model. In 1789, the 5th Duke built a great set of stables. 80 years later they were converted to a hospital, and a few years after that this enormous dome was added. Larger than the Pantheon and St. Peter's in Rome or St. Paul's Cathedral, it was the world's largest unsupported dome for many years. It also contains a whispering gallery, and standing on this spot can achieve a remarkable echoing effect. As I mentioned earlier, the well dressing tradition has been celebrated in Derbyshire for hundreds of years. The origin of the tradition is obscure, although it has been speculated that it began as a pagan custom, offering thanks to gods for a reliable water supply, or possibly later as a thanks for a delivery from the Black Death in 1348. This place can be seen during the summer from May to September, the earliest date being Ascension Day, which is the 40th day after Easter. The designs can be very beautiful and very ornate, and mostly the themes are religious, although this is not always the case. And secular themes are becoming more commonplace these days. Moving back down towards the south of the area, you find a number of limestone escarpments. Kerber Edge is one, and there are Froggatt Edge and Basso Edge as well. These areas are very popular with rock climbers. This leads us down to the Derwent Valley, which was right at the forefront of the Industrial Revolution, thanks mainly to this man, Richard Arkwright. Originally from Preston in Lancashire, he developed machinery that was going to replace hand labour in the conversion of raw cotton to thread for weaving. He used this machinery in a small mill that he opened in Nottingham, which was powered by horses. But with a new partner, a man called Jeremiah Strutt, he opened the first water-powered cotton mill in Cromford. There was a long history of lead mining in the hills around Cromford, and the underwater streams from these lead mines gave a plentiful supply of water to power the machines in the mill. As the business grew, he had to bring in workers from outside the locality, so he built a cluster of cottages near the mill to house them. This is now considered to be the first factory housing development in the world. Arkwright was a ruthless employer. The working hours were long and rigidly adhered to. Anyone who was late was excluded from work for the rest of the day and fined an extra day's pay. He encouraged weavers with large families to move to Cromford, and whole families were employed, including large numbers of children as young as 7. At one point, nearly 2/3 of the 1,150 employees were children. The Cromford Mill complex has been declared a World Heritage Site and one of the country's 100 irreplaceable sites. Just over the hill from Cromford is the small town of Wirksworth. with a history going back to Neolithic times. There is evidence of Roman occupation, and in Anglo-Saxon times there were many lead mines in the hills around the town. By the 18th century there were many thousand lead mines worked individually. Daniel Defoe gives a first-hand account of a lead miner's family and the miner himself at work. At this time, deeper mines were introduced with drainage channels called soughs, and the water from these channels was the water that powered Richard Arkwright's mills. 4 miles from Wirksworth is the small farming village of Kirk Ireton, and this is where you will find a pub called the Barley Mow, a pub which has hardly changed since the 17th century. The beer is still served directly from barrels from a hatch in one of the walls. And 50 years ago it was one of the last places in the country to convert to decimal currency, as the 87-year-old landlady of the time did not approve of the newfangled currency. The village still retains a lot of the old customs. Well, I hope this has given you a small taste of the many and varied delights that this area has to offer. Far too many to put into a short film. You should come and have a look at the place yourself. You would have a really good time. Thank you for watching. Goodbye for now.